Let's discuss all of this, and I'm joined now for the next half an hour or so by former SARS executive Johann van Loggerenberg, Caroline James, a lawyer from Corruption Watch, the spokesperson of the Special Investigating Unit Kaizer Kganyago, and Sam Soul, managing partner at Amabhungane. Gentlemen and lady, thank you very much for your time. I just want to point out that we were really interested as well to hear from the Hawks, because they are the ones who go out there and make some of the arrests, and we got from the Hawks, we got a response sent to our producer, Rich Twala, and I want to read it very quickly, that we did invite them, but they said to us, after serious consideration and deliberation on the subtopics that we wanted to raise, e.g. state capture and other high-profile investigations, most of the matters under your discussion are still under investigations. Above this, we are unable to reveal or discuss methodologies employed in all our investigations, particularly those not yet finalized and suspects not arrested. Importantly, as a responsible law enforcement agency, we would rather not cast any aspersion on the people of interest on all these matters by partaking in media discussions. Hope you find this in order. Regards. That's from Hangwani of the Hawks. Well, we were not going to be discussing any specific individual cases. We wanted to be talking about the issue of, we hear about corruption all the time. Statements are being issued, promises are being made by government, including early this week, the presidency newsletter making those promises, but we are still not seeing the consequences. People are wanting to see more, but the Hawks declined our invitation. Let me start with you, Tate Kganyago, from the Special Investigating Unit. After all, the SIU is an independent statutory body that is accountable to South Africa's parliament and the country's presidents, and your mandate is to investigate corruption in the public space. For example, how are you doing when you hear all this noise around the need for action and consequence? How is the SIU doing?
Thank you very much, Braden, and I think you have summed up our mandate very, very nicely. We really hear what the public of South Africa are saying, and we have come out very clear to say, when we looked at how we were functioning before, one of the things that were there was the issue of not finishing our investigations in time. We have now changed that around, and it's out there for people to see. We have pushed ourselves to the limit to make sure that we do the investigation as quickly as possible. And the one thing that I want to make clear is we are running a lot of investigations. We come up with a lot of outcomes, and the outcome that we have got end-to-end control over is the outcome where we are able to set aside contracts that were entered into illegally and be able to, through our courts and through the special tribunal, recover the monies that needs to be recovered. And that is what we are doing as we speak. And there are cases that have just happened now. We are dealing with the ESCOM issue, as everybody might know by now. And we are trying our level best to make sure that we save the government of the monies that are misused by the people who are scrupulous, who are really doing wrong things around this country. And we make sure that we do it. In some cases, we make sure that we get in even before the money is spent, and we are able to then stop the money from being spent.
Now, Kaizer, on that ESCOM issue, the summons, we understand that the burden of proof is lower in a civil case, okay, than in a criminal case where you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. Is it easier for you to be going after the corruptors and those corrupted, like in this case, in civil proceedings and get the money back, rather than criminal prosecutions?
It is not about it being easy. It is what we are expected to do as the Special Investigating Unit. Therefore, we do that when there are three outcomes that we have when we do our investigations. The first one is the one that we're talking about, which is the civil one, where we are able to go and get the money back from the people. The second one is when we find criminality, we then refer that part to the NPA so that they do what they are supposed to do in terms of their mandate. And then the third one is the issue where we find that people have done something against their employment contracts. We then refer that to the institution that we're investigating to make sure that they are able to deal with their disciplinary hearing. Our contribution to that will then be the fact that we will give them our investigators as witnesses in those cases. Therefore, it is not a choice to say we are choosing the one that the burden of proof is not whatever. It is what we are expected to do, and that is the control that we have in terms of the process. That one we have control over, and we will do it in all of the cases that we are dealing with.
We'll have to explore how successful that's been and how it's going to be. But you've mentioned the NPA. Before I bring in my other three guests here from Caroline, Sam, and Johann, I just want to play and focus on what the NPA itself has said recently. The National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batoyi, for instance, she says that she understands that South Africans want to see prosecutions and convictions, but she says that proper investigations that lead to convictions do take a lot of time. She was speaking at a media briefing in June.
Whilst the pressure to prosecute these cases is understandably enormous, believe me, I feel it. And given the pervasive culture of impunity that this country has sadly become accustomed to in recent times, and which almost entrenched itself, it must be borne in mind that quality investigations and prosecutions regrettably need time and patience. We do need to ensure that we deliver on all fronts. Given what this country is emerging from, I feel and share the impatience of the public for justice. But we want to assure the people that there are so many behind the scenes that are hard at work under very challenging circumstances, but that the wheels of justice are turning and that the rule of law will prevail.
And she further said that the NPA is now taking a tough stance against delaying tactics in high-profile cases.
What we have found in a number of high-profile cases is that there is a strategy to delay matters and to deal with a number of interlocutory applications. And so, you know, the prosecution can't really control that, but we have decided that as the NPA, we are going to take a much more vigorous stance with regard to these dilatory tactics, and that we have sought counsel's views on this, and we are certainly we have a strategy that we're putting together to ensure that dilatory tactics that tend to be employed to delay these cases will be much more vigorously opposed by the NPA.
Well, we're still waiting to see how fast that's going to happen, because from where we are sitting, it looks like high-profile cases are taking longer. Now, let me bring you in here, Sam Soul from Amabhungane. From your investigation, when you hear that about the NPA now trying to say we're going to move faster and take action, your investigation and over the years when you've been working with some of these high-profile cases, would you agree that things need to move faster? Can we trust that the NPA will actually deliver now?
Look, they definitely have to move faster, but I think what people don't understand is part of state capture. In fact, part of the first part of state capture was the systematic destruction of the criminal justice system. Both the NPA, the destruction of the Scorpions, the destruction of capabilities within the police and the Hawks, the removal of Anwar Ramat. You know, the Hawks were definitely a second team compared to the Scorpions, but even that was dismantled and destroyed. The destruction at SARS, and even the SIU did not escape. And so we're sitting with a position that for the last 20 years almost since the arms deal, but in something that accelerated under President Jacob Zuma. The systems of state accountability have been destroyed to protect the ANC and its leadership, and we're now reaping, you know, that bitter harvest.
But the president said early this week in his newsletter that, and I'm quoting here, "We have rebuilt vital institutions like the NPA, SARS, the Hawks. So it looks like that is not happening. Now, Johann, you were at SARS several years ago, and you were embroiled in that so-called rogue unit. Now, as a person on the ground, I mean, as SARS as well, you have to investigate illicit dealings, for example. Is your experience that where there's political interference and that things won't work out?
Oh, I think the case study that you mentioned is a prime example of political interference. I can just say it on this point that I agree with what the speakers have all said. Except I would add to that we must not forget that pre-democracy we had a criminal justice system that served a small population of this country and was by design intended to suppress the majority. And that is what the democratic government inherited. And so there were those 90s and early 2000s, which were the golden years of the introduction of new law enforcement tools like the SIU, the Asset Forfeiture Unit, and the Scorpions, and further legislation. And then, of course, came state capture, and that, set us back. But we've never really had an optimal criminal justice system post-democracy. For some reason or another, we tend to still want to see the different pieces of the justice system separately, whether it comes to budget allocation, resource training, skills, and even measuring. So by way of an example, the police measure their efficiency on busts and arrests. Prosecutors measure their efficiency on prosecutions on cases that they select to be brought before court. And we don't see much of what's further down the line in the same system. And I think it's high time, and these sort of pandemic corrupt activities should force us to start looking at the different parts of government that form part of a single system and understand the value chain. So for how many detectives do you need prosecutors? For how many prosecutors do you need magistrates and judges and translators? And how many court buildings do you need? And all of that needs to be aligned. And at the same time, then you can begin to prioritize your cases.
But currently, we don't have that kind of approach. That's a way forward. From Corruption Watch's perspective, Caroline James, and the bigger question that we're asking this morning is, why does it seem like prosecutions of high-profile cases involving political figures, top business figures, wherever they happen, they take longer? If I look back, and I saw a media report recently that was looking back for the last 20 years or so, of the 25 high-profile cases, and I think that was Ferial Hafiji's from Daily Maverick pointing that out. Only one case that we can all remember, Jackie Silebi, who was a former police commissioner, he ended up in court, he ended up in jail, and he passed on. But if you look at the others, they are still pending, and we have some of them still linked to the Zondo Commission of Inquiry.
I think that we need to remember and listen to what the NDPP, Shamira Batoy, said, and she emphasized how complicated and complex these corruption-related prosecutions are and the detailed investigations that are needed to bring a case that is winnable before court. And when there are high-profile individuals, it's very important that the cases are actually winnable, because it would do terrible things for the NPA's integrity and legitimacy if they start bringing cases that are not fully investigated and that aren't ready for trial.
I mean, just on that point, sorry, Caroline, just on that point, I mean, early this week, the Hawks issued a statement saying that they were welcoming the sentence imposed on Nombuso Dlamini, Siyasanga Gamane at the Mbizana Regional Court now at the end of July. And this is a case that it involves SASA. They defrauded 1.2 million rand about 9 years ago. Just that case just took 9 years to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate fact of the criminal justice system that things take time, and that does frustrate citizens. So we have to balance the need to ensure that the cases are thorough and ready to be taken to court with the need for immediate justice. And I think that that's what the NPA and the Hawks are working at now. But it's the other aspects of accountability that we think that are very important. As the representative from the SIU mentioned, the goal at the moment is to ensure that corruption is identified early and identified when the money is being stolen, so that action can be taken at the sort of present time. The problem that we're seeing now is that we're only seeing accountability after the fact. And so that is when we can only see accountability through convictions, prosecutions, and convictions. And I think what we should be doing now is trying to put pressure on the various accountability mechanisms to ensure that there is real-time monitoring and real-time enforcement of accountability mechanisms so that we stop the corruption at its source and as it happens.
Well, the President alluded to that in his newsletter on Monday, saying ultimately the success of these efforts does not only rely on law enforcement alone. I heard Johann van Loggerenberg talking about the need for alignment. I hear from Kaizer Kganyago saying they are moving faster as the SIU to try and recover monies. We'll try and explore a little bit more what needs to happen really now to change. Among other things, you've already mentioned some of that when we come back shortly here on Today, as we continue to look at what is happening with corruption. Of course, the heat is on. Government officials stealing from the country should have nowhere to hide. The majority of South Africans today agree with that statement. We'll continue our discussion on corruption shortly.